was panicking, and I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for the 24th to be over so I can submit it. Whatever I did, I just want to submit it.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm hiding. I'm hiding in
Ah.
my room trying to get like a quiet time, and it's like every 5 seconds my kid's like, Mom, what are you doing? And I'm like, just go, leave me alone.
Yeah.
I need to focus. I need to hear my ideas so I can make it in the paper.
It's hard to do with children, I remember.
Well, and it's like the week of Thanksgiving, so I have 2 of them. And yay!
I know. But like the time, so I don't know if you guys remember when I said the time invested in finding the articles, like gold.
I love it because the subject that I picked is something that affects my child for a couple of years.
Remember.
So, yeah, so now when I'm reading this, like every time I read it, I'm like, turn on the TV. Turn on the TV. And
Yeah,
like, why?
it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and I'm happy that my second child, that I didn't let him watch TV at all until he passed the 2 years and couple months. Then he started to watch a little bit, but because he didn't watch when he was like younger, he doesn't have the interest, or he doesn't like watch a lot. He likes to play with toys more. So that's like, I'm really happy that I did that with my second boy.
Oh yeah, that's an investment too.
Yeah, it was hard to like make him not watch when his oldest like watching for a while.
Yeah.
But it was
worth
worth
once
it.
they get hooked on toys and books, there's no turning back.
Yes, that's the big benefit of it. He likes to play with his cars. He likes to do buildings more. Like, he gives his back to the TV and just do that. So that's like really a reward for me. Like, I'm happy with that.
Well, it's good to see you guys, and I'm gonna record this.
I actually missed your class. I was like, I miss her.
Oh, and I missed you guys too.
I have to agree with her too. I did miss this class.
Say that again?
I have to agree with her
Recording
too.
in progress.
I did miss this class.
Oh, yeah, it's been a crazy semester. I was in Houston, then I was in Boston, then I had doctor's appointments. But thank you for being patient with me changing the schedule. And I'm going to record this because my attendance book is falling apart. I don't treat it well, and now it's falling apart. I'll know who's here. Before I start on pragmatics, are there any questions, concerns? I know your next assignment is first and foremost on your mind. I realize that. But I know that you'll do a great job. And there are ways to read articles. So the last 2 sections of an article are really very useful, like the results and the discussion, and also the methods, so you know how the study was done. Okay, in case you picked articles that were like 40 pages long. You don't have to do deep reading of every single page. Okay, I am going to get started on this topic, which I think is very interesting. And I don't know, you might have covered it in another class, but I think because it is so theoretical and is so much a part of the principles of language and language learning, I think that is crucial. But it's not what we automatically think of when we think of language learning. So let's dive in. Okay, so pragmatics, the definition, kind of vague, but the formal definition is the study of how people use language in a particular way. How much more vague can you get? But if you think about it, like if you stop to really listen to the conversations around you, no matter where you are, and then you go further and think about, well, why did that person say that the way they did? And then even further, you try to put yourself in the shoes of an English learner. And some of you, at some point, you were English learners, and so you can probably relate. In English, and actually in any language, in every language, they do and say things in a particular way that are particular, not only to that language, but also to that culture, right? Because English is spoken in so many countries, right? Let's just start with the United States and England, right? And we're not even talking about other places like Nigeria and India and on and Toronto, right? But even with the English that's spoken in England and the United States, the language is used differently and utterances sound different and intentions are different. So to understand the meaning of an utterance, we must understand the context in which it was uttered. So I'm going to pull up the Brown book, which we're not using this semester, but I'm just going to look at a couple pages here. Okay. So we're going to look at two pieces of discourse. Here's the first one. The phone rings. A 10-year-old child picks up the phone. This is back before cell phone. Stephanie says, hello. The voice says, hi, Steph. Is your mom there? Stephanie says, just a minute. She cups the phone and yells, Mom, phone. The mom says, I'm in the tub. Stephanie says, she can't talk now. Want to leave a message? And the voice says, I'll call back later. Bye. So the mom says, I'm in the tub. Well, she doesn't necessarily want the daughter or the person on the phone to know everything about her being in the tub. That's her way of saying, I'm not available, right?
Mm.
Pragmatically, that statement is useful in this piece of discourse. But if you're someone from Mars or even new to the language, maybe not. So there's something called pragmatics, but then there's socio-pragmatics. The pragmatics that are specific to a culture. So the American says, what an unusual necklace. It's beautiful. The Samoan says, person from Samoa, oh. The person from Samoa responds, please take it. What do you think that's about?
Like they want them to look at it?
Okay, that's a good guess. So you're saying that the Samoan is offering for the American to look at it kind of like up close.
Maybe it's like, please buy it.
Please buy it.
Yeah, or something like that.
That's a thought. That's a thought. I think I heard a third person say something. So really, in some cultures, if you're given a compliment, then you feel obligated to offer up whatever it is.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Like we Middle Eastern, if you say this shirt is beautiful, it's like I'm taking it off and you won't take it. I'm not gonna keep it if you don't like it.
Is it? Yes, very common in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So can you see how that would be so confusing to an American?
Yeah, and then I will say we're Middle Eastern, we do that. If you like it, I have to explain why I offer my whatever, even if it's something at my home, a candle. This candle is very beautiful. I was like, okay, it's yours, take it. They're like, why?
It's hard for us to wrap ourselves around the idea that the Samoan saying, please take it, is equivalent to us saying, in a humble way, thank you so much. Or, some of us say, oh no, this old thing, like there's different cultural ways to respond to a compliment. I'm going to talk some more about that. The American teacher says, would you like to read? Okay, when you're in a classroom and the teacher wants the student to read, they might say, would you like to read? Well, we don't necessarily take them literally. There's actually a lot in our discourse that we don't take literally. So the Russian student says, no, I would not. Because they take it as, literal. What do you guys think about that one?
Straightforward, like immediately, no, I wouldn't do that. I would read. I will say yes, I would read. Even if I don't know what I'm reading or I can't pronounce it, I will just jump into it. But maybe.
But really, if we're taking it literally and we're culturally new, then what that teacher is asking me is if I would like to read. And the answer should be yes or no. So I'm just trying for us to put our feet in someone else's shoes. But it's hard.
Maybe the student was thinking like, oh, do you like to read like on your free time or something? Like, do you like to read outside of class?
Well, that could be, except look at the way the student answered.
I believe that in our language, there's some things we say that don't necessarily need us up here. So like when we're saying, would you like to read? It is implying that you are reading. When someone from outside the culture hears, would you like to read? They think it's a question. That's why they answer yes or no.
Right. Yeah, so they're being pragmatic about it, really, but coming from another culture and another language. So the Russian student isn't wrong. The Russian student is just not acclimated to the cultural ways of the English language in the United States. It is really fascinating, but the reason we know that the student doesn't think that the teacher is asking, like, do you like to read in your free time? Because that is a good guess. Then the student would have said, no, I don't. But the student says, no, I would not. Because they really believe this is a question, because it is a question. So this is just fascinating and like beyond grammar, vocabulary, phonology, and all of that students have to learn. People wonder, well, what do level 4 students learn? It used to be adults were level 1, 2, or 3. Well, there's also level 4 in some curricula, and these are the types of things that they're learning, the things that are more subtle. So let me okay, so pragmatics in any place, in any country, in any language is governed by context, right? Oftentimes as future teachers, when we think about context, we oftentimes think about like what students are reading, and that, for instance, picture books allow students to have some context so that they can guess at words or concepts that they don't understand. And then context in the course of conversation, oftentimes we think of the whole piece of discourse, like I make an utterance. It's not clear what I said, but you know what was said before, you know what's said after, so you're given context. But context really has 4 elements. There's physical context, so where the conversation is taking place, and the objects and the actions that are present. Okay, all these things help us figure out. Then there's epistemic context. That is the background knowledge that is shared by the speakers and the listeners, right? Oftentimes that background knowledge is common background knowledge if they know one another. And if they don't, they still have their individual background knowledge. Background knowledge is context. Think about it, like someone reading suppose it's a picture book and the picture's not helping that much. The words, they're helping, but there's something that I experienced yesterday that's going to help me more. Epistemic knowledge, context, linguistic context, things that were said previous to the utterances under consideration, okay? What was said or written linguistically before helps us with context. And then there's social context. What is the social relationship and setting of the speakers and listeners? Because, for instance, if you're witnessing the conversation between a CEO and a middle-level manager at a company, you know, there are some things that you know probably won't be said because of their relationship. I mean, you're 95% sure because of the roles of these people and their social relationship, right? Two people on their first date have a different social relationship than two people who've been married for 20 years, okay? So physical context, epistemic context, linguistic context, and social context all help us with the pragmatics of language. There's something called direct speech acts and indirect speech acts, okay? And they're the fundamental patterns of interaction. Direct speak, sorry, oops, someone is coming in, she must have gotten. Okay, when we say something directly, it's a direct speech act. When we say or do something directly, indirect speech act. And each speech act involves locutionary act and an illocutionary act. The locutionary act is what you are saying, you know, exactly what you are saying. But the illocutionary part of that is what is the communicative effect of what you're saying, right? We have to put those two together to really understand the speech act. So for instance, quote, you have to get up early. Okay, I'm sorry, you have to get up early tomorrow. This is a parent saying to a child. That's the locutionary act. That's exactly, in quotes, what was said. But what is the communicative effect? You know, and we don't know. We don't always know because we have to have context. What was said before that, okay? All these things. Where was it said? What is the background knowledge of both speakers? In other words, did something happen last night, the night before, last week? And what is their relationship? We know they're mother-child, but what does that relationship look like? So in other words, what was said, the locutionary part, was that a command? Was that an assertion? Did it kind of sound like a question? If we saw the parent's face, heard the volume in their voice, and knew some of that context, that would help us with the illocutionary part. So it's really interesting when we boil it right down. anything that anyone says can be put in 3 categories. It's just amazing. With the millions of words in the English language and the different ways that we combine them, we're either making a declaration, right? Declarative sentence, an interrogative sentence, or an imperative sentence. And, you know, the word sentence, I don't know. I think if I were to rewrite these books, I might not use the word sentence, because we could be doing these things, declarative, making a declarative statement, interrogative, and imperative. We could be doing these things without using complete sentences. And if you listen to people have conversation, lots of times they're not using complete sentences, right? Which is really interesting. That's what informal speech is. So if you're making a declarative statement, that will either be an assertion or a denial. An assertion basically conveys information, and a denial claims that information is true or false. Okay? So, and then we have interrogative. That speech act is a question. What is the function of the speech act? It elicits information. And the third and final sentence type or statement type is imperative. Okay. What is that in terms of the speech act? It's when we give orders. And what is the function of an imperative statement? It's to get others to behave in certain ways. Amazing that with all the language and all the language theory and all the words that we have in our vocabulary, it boils down to these 3 categories. Fascinating. Okay. So I mentioned that sometimes speech is direct and sometimes it's indirect. And you can think about your own speech to people you know, people who know you. Think about your significant others, your children, your friends, your bosses. Are you sometimes indirect or indirect with you as opposed to just being direct? And if so, why do you think, why are we sometimes indirect?
I think we are like indirect most of the time. We are too shy, too trying to be too polite, not to tell like our real thing. Like, oh, I'm stepping by in Chicago and I'm gonna visit you guys for like this time, and I have 1,000 things to do. I'm not gonna say I can't because I have these things. I'm like, oh, you're welcome anytime. You can just step by and ruin my schedule. It's fine. So. So, like, we can't.
So
like,
the first person, I think, is the first person being indirect and the second person is lying.
Yeah, so like, no, the first person is being so direct. Like, I'm coming to
Oh,
Chicago and I
okay.
decide to stay with you for a couple of days because I have a time.
I thought the first person was just saying,
No,
I will be in town this next week.
Yes. And I don't tell them that I have things that I cannot like host you for these couple days, but I am being too polite, or I cannot show that I'm busy. So I'm like, oh, like, to hell with my schedule and my kids and whatever is happening with my family, and I'm gonna devote these 2 days for you. Just come and I'm gonna show you the bean. Like,
Actually,
okay.
okay.
I'm angry. But I just like, I show them that I'm like, because we have to, like, it's like an obligation. We have to be the host and we have to be polite about it. It's like culture plus religion plus so many things, like on top of it. Plus my husband is too shy to say no.
So sometimes it's cultural obligation.
Yes.
Which turns into being polite.
Yes,
which is indirect as opposed
and religiously you have to be like really nice to the guest, and you have to like put them like before yourself. I don't know if I said that sentence right.
Mm-hmm.
So
No,
anyway,
you
like,
did.
yeah, it's so many things, but it comes from being like an Iraqi, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and like so many things. So we have people like they have a transit for a couple hours, and we have work or we have some appointment or some other things, and they're like, "Oh, we're here," and they just call us like in the last 5 minutes. We don't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't." We were like, "Okay, we're coming." And so, sometimes it's like, "No, we should say no, but like we can't still."
Right. That's a really good example. And I think that to some extent, everyone has that burden. Like even if you're not overly religious, if you're not Iraqi, probably I would be more likely to be a little bit more direct, you know, to protect my time and what I had on the to-do list. But you know, probably 75%.
Well, my kids will do that, but not me.
75% chance that I would actually meet up with them and do something with them. And, you know, that's just, you feel obligated. So one of the ways that we're indirect is by being polite. Does anyone, that was a great example. Can anyone think of any other times when either you're indirect, you make the decision to be indirect, or someone else is indirect with you? And do you hate it when people are indirect?
Being sarcastic or just speaking out loud.
Yes. Sarcasm.
Like, oh, those
Which,
dishes are gonna clean themselves, you know?
yes. Oh, the dishes aren't gonna clean themselves. Sarcasm is a great example of being indirect, and sarcasm oftentimes does not translate cross-culturally, and it could be a disaster. That's a great example. Clarissa has her hand up.
I was just thinking about like how sometimes people will make statements like, "I'll see what I can do," or something along those lines. But with their body language and their expressions, you just know it's not going to happen. So
yeah, so they like they're beating around the bush.
Yeah, beating around the bush.
Yeah, and sometimes you can tell more when they're in person because, like you say, there's those paralinguistic clues, the body language, the facial expression. Yep. So this is all important to know. Say it. Oh, Evelyn?
I was gonna share that I don't like it when my parents are indirect. They tend to do that a lot, especially when it comes to making plans. So for example, this happened over the summer. There was like a week where my sister was off from work, and then my dad took vacation days, and then he told me, he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go to Michigan soon." And then I was like, "Okay, just let me know when." And he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go soon." And then next thing you know, it was like the next week. And then I was like, "You never told me." And then he's like, "Yes, I did." And I was like, "No, you didn't."
So like these indirect statements sometimes get in the way of our lives. And there are plenty examples of this from distant relatives, friends, and close family members. That's a great example. Thank you, Evelyn. So some of the reasons why, or some of the ways that people are indirect, well, one of the reasons is face saving. To save face means like to avoid embarrassment. Showing politeness. Sometimes it's maintaining some degree of secrecy. Okay. So here's an example of being indirect. It's quite late for you to watch TV right now, a parent to a child. So if I were new to the language and I read this statement, I would say, oh, maybe the mother wants the child to do something else because they don't want them to watch TV. Why doesn't the parent just say, I don't want you to watch TV, go to bed? Because that's crystal clear. This is a little bit indirect. It's quite late for you to watch TV right Does this mean the parent wants the child to play a game instead? Probably not. We can also identify indirect speech acts by considering the responses that they arouse, right? That's a piece of context also. There's something called, and this is longstanding, Grice's conversational maxim. Sometimes they're called Gricean maxim. The person that made it up was named Grice, right? In 1994, a philosopher who was also interested in communication and language. He referred to implied statement or proposition as implicature, okay? To understand how speakers and listeners use and interpret implicatures, we need to examine how they are used in conversation, like phonological and grammatical rules that govern language use. There are social rules that govern conversation. So once the English learners learn all the grammatical and phonological rules, this piece is really important. Okay. The husband says, how much longer will you be? And I'm sorry, I think I mixed up the slides. Yeah, I did, I apologize. This slide should have come first. The husband says, how much longer will you be? The wife says, mix yourself a drink. Okay, the wife is not being literal. She's probably not being that indirect. What is she saying?
It's gonna take a while.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a while. So without saying that, she's saying it. Dr. Gregory House says, how many friends do you have? Lucas Douglas says 17. Dr. House says, seriously? Do you keep a list or something? Okay, so a little sarcastic. But on to Grice's maxim, conversational maxim. So what Grice said was that conversations are governed by 4 cooperative principles. When speakers intentionally violate the maxims, and we all know the maxims, if you are part of the culture within which you live, then you understand the maxims, and if you violate them, that's doing something on purpose, okay? And Grice calls that flouting the maxim. So instead of violating, he calls it flouting. Okay, so the first is the maxim of quantity. It says, make your contribution as informative as is required. Do not make your contribution more informative than required. Jane says, what are you cooking? Sarah says, lunch. Jane says, something smells good. What are you making? So she has to push further. Sarah, she just flouted the maxim of quantity by giving what? What did she provide for Jane?
She's making lunch. Not necessarily
Right.
what kind of lunch, what type of.
Right. So she's flouting the maxim of quantity by not giving enough information. She didn't give too much information. She didn't give enough information. And because she's part of this culture, she was doing it on purpose. So why would someone do this? Sometimes language can be used as a weapon.
Because they're evil. My mom does that all the time.
Well, yes, some people are always grouchy. That could be it.
No, but my mom, she's like, what are you making? And she was like, food. Like,
Yeah.
thank you, Mom, thank you.
Why else might she be doing? I mean, it could be a million reasons. Why else would she flout?
Children ask the same question over and over again.
Oh, that's a good one. She's annoyed because she's been asked the question many times by her children. That's a good example.
That explains a lot.
Right.
Oh, I come from a life experience that's been going on every 5 minutes now. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
I understand now.
Or maybe she just doesn't like Jane. I mean, there could be so many reasons, but just know that it's purposeful. Unless you're not part of the culture, you have to learn over time the 4 principles or Grice's maxims. So let's look at the second one, or let's look at the examples. Lisa says, "Hey, what are you up to?" Sean says, "I just went to the bathroom. I spent about 21 minutes in there. I was very productive on the toilet. Prior to that, I was paying bills. Before that, I walked up the stairs." Of course, this is flouting in the other direction, right? Have you come across people like this?
Yes, unfortunately.
Clarissa, you don't have to name names, but it sounds like you have someone in mind.
Yes.
So, part of this is sometimes, it doesn't have to be purposely aggravating the other speaker. Sometimes there are people who don't pick up on social cues. These might be people who are on the autistic spectrum. So we'll put those folks to the side because that's a different category. But if you have a healthy understanding and can read cues, understand cues, then of course you wouldn't be giving all of this information. But I can think of a couple of people who are like this. One, I'll tell you guys this. So my first husband, I was his second wife. He's been married a lot. He just got married to his 5th wife this year. But his 3rd wife, he was married to her for at least 10 years. And she did not know how to read cues. But I would ask her a simple question and she'd be really specific like this. And it made me not want to, she was not autistic or anything. But yeah, so she was, for whatever reason, flouting the maxim. Either too much information or too little is considered flouting that first maxim. Then there's the maxim of quality. That says, say what you believe to be true and make a claim based on sufficient evidence. Okay? Probably some politicians who flout this maxim. So this has to do with people who are constantly making statements that aren't true or make statements that they're not able to support, but claim them to be true. So that's the maxim of quality. Third is the maxim of relevance. Be relevant in your conversation. It feels great engaging in conversation, and you kind of have to stay in the family of that topic. Going off on a completely unrelated topic, you're flouting the maxim of relevance at that point. Okay. And finally, the maxim of manner. This is particularly important for teachers. Avoid vague expressions, avoid ambiguous expressions. How is vague and ambiguous different?
I don't know.
Ambiguous can mean 2 different things.
Right, good. So vague just means kind of like nondescript. But ambiguous, whatever you're saying could really mean A or it could mean B easily. So we have to think about the way we put language together, both our spoken language and our written language, so that it's not ambiguous. and don't be excessively wordy. This has to do with the manner in which we use language. And this has to do with language that's either spoken or written, right? If we're excessively wordy, we lose the listener and we lose the reader, okay? If we're vague or ambiguous, we simply either confuse or frustrate the listener or the reader, okay? So those are the 4 maxims that conversation is governed by, right? If we don't adhere to them, we're flouting. Maximum of quantity, maximum of quality, maximum of relevance, and maximum of manner. Okay. Any comments before I move on? Okay. Then we have cross-cultural pragmatics. And probably some of you have traveled more than I have. I've been to several Caribbean countries. Been to Canada. I've been to Portugal, but I have not been to Asia or Africa. So some of you might know just as much as I do, or more so, that the pragmatics are different in different cultures and languages. Pragmatics maintains that language is embedded in a cultural context. Social rules governing language use may vary from culture to culture. So our normal opener, right, always is, how are you? Or how you doing? Not even when we're greeting someone in a formal way necessarily, but if we see someone and pass them in the hallway, we might say that. Hey, how are you? What do we expect when we say that?
I'm fine.
What do we usually expect?
Good.
Okay, yes. Yeah, we usually expect people just to say good, or sometimes nothing at all. They just return it by saying, yeah, they nod their head, right? So what it is, and we rarely think about this, is it really usually is not a literal question unless, say, we're concerned about someone that we care about. And in that case, we might say it differently. We might say, how are you? Right? If we pass someone in the hallway, we don't say it like that. We don't say, how are you? Right? It's all in the words that we stress, the rhythm that we use. Really, how are you is usually just an opener. So with that in mind, have you eaten is an opener, a Chinese opener. And China had a great famine. And that is why that is the opener. And it just stuck. But if we were to go there and hear that, we would be confused. We would feel the need to say yes or no. Even if we learned about this, getting that question would take us off guard. First, we might be confused as to why they're asking us. Maybe we think like, do we look hungry, or do I look hungry? I don't know. But how are you is the same thing. Someone new to our culture may not know that it's simply just an opener. It doesn't mean you tell us all about what happened the whole week or how you're feeling and that you're in an emotional crisis. Hopefully, if you open up in that way, the person will be receptive. But usually, how are you or how you doing is just an opener, like, have you eaten? A Malaysian opener, where are you from? Where are you going? It's not literal. They don't necessarily want to know where you're from or where you're going. It's simply a greeting. And that comes from their focus on time and prosperity. Okay. So, question to you, are there cultural differences in your experience in how people respond to compliments, or even gender differences?
Yes.
Yes.
When I was learning Japanese, my teacher said that in their culture, the person whom you're talking to is more important than yourself. So even though you're asking how are you, they will answer, but they won't ask you that back to you, especially if that person has a higher position than you.
Oh, like
So
the
for example,
higher status?
yes. For example, he used the status of a coworker and a boss. So he said that he tells the boss, how are you? The boss will say good, and he will leave. And that's okay. Like there's no need to continue that conversation.
Oh, you're talking about a greeting. Okay. That's true. You know, status is a context and it has to do with social relationship. But what about compliments? When someone pays someone a compliment, do you notice differences in how people respond to a compliment? Like complimenting something that you cooked? I think Amanda was going to say something about that.
Compliment wise, I mean, perhaps like in Islam or a Muslim culture, Arab culture, sorry. Usually if it's like a girl having another conversation with a girl, maybe they would like exchange like, I don't know, compliments between each other. Like they'd ask about like, I'm good. They don't only ask about you, but like your whole entire family. So like, I'm good. How's your family and all that other exchanges and stuff.
Oh, so it's like a conversation starter.
Yeah.
So if one woman complimented another woman's dress, said, "Oh, that's a pretty dress," how would the woman respond?
So then eventually they would start asking like where you got it from, and like if they know that place or if they knew this other place, and like, and then they'd start eventually talking about like, do you know this person or do you know this person? It's
yeah,
a very
it's really like a conversation starter.
Yeah.
And then what about men?
Yeah, I was gonna comment about that. Like men are so different. You cannot compare like Middle Eastern guy for his beautiful shirt. Like that would be really like a little bit weird if you tell him like, nice haircut or nice eyes, or like he will be looking at you like, what's wrong with you? Especially if it's from another man. Like it's not really acceptable to.
So if it's from another man, that's really taboo.
You can compliment his car, his like stuff, like, oh, that's a wonderful truck you have there, and they will
Middle Eastern culture.
Yeah, that will be I agree with you. It will be a conversation opener for a very long time if they open it about a car or about
but nothing on them, like not clothing, not glasses.
Not only that, in our culture, men are very proud of their facial hair. So like, if a man has like a really nice big beard, they'd be like, oh, like how long have you been growing that out for? And like, how do you take care of it so nicely? Yes. So I agree. It's mainly about like their cars or like, you know, materialistic things.
Yes. So I think that men in general are like that. What do you all think, the rest of you guys?
I think that's true.
In terms of accepting compliments, a little bit.
Well, in my case, my dad, when someone gives him a compliment, he kind of jokes back. Like he makes a joke out of it. And then that's how the conversation starts. And then they start telling jokes. And then, yeah, that's how the conversation goes.
I noticed that, like, some men are very skillful at that. When they get a compliment, they make a joke. Isn't that interesting?
It is, because like with women, like for me, like if someone gives me a compliment, like someone compliments me on my shirt or like my outfit, I would be like, oh, thanks, I like your shoes. Like I would return it back.
Right.
Well, I was gonna say that when she said about the facial hair and the beard, I was like, I usually hear from my cousin like, nice beard. No, I grow it myself. I was planning it all night, and they make it fun, so everybody start laughing and they shift from the main thing. So
there is a whole field of study on gender-related pragmatic. That's like a thing. Like if you all decide to get your PhD, you can study that because it is so interesting. In fact, maybe I may redo the course so that students can do a little research project because this stuff is so juicy. So there are different cultural strategies in responding to compliments. And then, so these might be generalizations, not to say that everyone in a certain culture responds in the same way. But Asian cultures tend to emphasize the group over individual success. They may be uncomfortable responding to individual compliments. A native English speaker from this culture might say, that was the best roast duck I've ever tasted. The person who made the roast duck is a non-native English speaker of Chinese culture. And he says, thank you, but my mother and grandmother make more delicious roast duck, because they're thinking about not the individual, not himself, but the group. Isn't that fascinating? Maybe not. So if you want to learn more about this, let me show you this website for a second. Okay. This website. Now this is so fascinating. I'll put the link in D2L because this is covering the link. And this is all about teaching pragmatics to English learners. So look at all the categories. Requesting the main point in the classroom, improving friendly discussions of controversial issues, email requests, in the mood, introducing pragmatic awareness at low levels, polite ways of correcting or contradicting, requesting responses from professors. Politeness is more than please. Like and it goes on and on. It's so fascinating, but it makes you think. It helps you to remember that there are so many facets to English teaching, and it's not just technical. Someone make a comment here. Oh, okay, Amanda, you're back on. Okay, so here are tips that teachers of English language learners may find helpful in the realm of pragmatics. Use scenarios, case studies, cultural capsules in reading, writing, and discussions to highlight how speakers use language within a context and how culture influences speakers. So it's great to be reading with your English learners, but use that opportunity to talk about how things are said and actually have fun with it. Like, did you see how he said that? I wonder why he said that. Let's think about it. Next, use direct and literal statements as often as possible to avoid confusion, especially to early learners, right? Because they will take you literally. Provide models of different forms of classroom discourse and turn them into lessons on language and culture. Back to the second bullet point, although you should be using as many direct and literal statements as possible, slowly introduce some statements that aren't literal, like idioms, because in this language, in this culture, we use idioms more than we realize. So we really do have to introduce them, but just one at a time. It could be part of a lesson. And English learners actually love to learn idioms. They memorize them, they use them, they begin to understand them. Suspend making negative judgments about the new English learners when they appear to say something that seemed confusing or awkward to you at first. Teachers should probe to find out what they are trying to say. Are you saying X or Y? Encourage new English language learners to work with their peers and teachers as much as possible so they're not in a bubble. Okay, here are some examples of nonverbal communications that are problematic and gestures that are problematic on the next slide. An Anglo teacher wanted to praise a Thai student for the good work she produced. When the teacher reached out to touch her head, the student moved away from the teacher. Why do you think the student did this? It's considered bad manners in that culture to touch someone else's head without their permission. And I would assert that you probably want to stay away from that, period. It's not just the Thai culture. There are many cultures where you just don't do that. Okay, number two, an ESL teacher teaching in Saudi Arabia was passing out assignments to students with her left hand. The students were not pleased with the teacher and showed their displeasure by frowning. Why do you think that is?
Because the devil is
from
leading
culture.
them giving them
Wait,
the
I have
time.
Amanda and Aya. Let
probably
me
we
hear
have the same-
Aya and then Amanda.
Okay, so because like we have like something, if you use your left hand, is like the devil will eat with you if you eat in the left hand, if you use it, which is not common as it was before right now. So
It's kind of phasing out.
yeah, it's like it's you know, like
that.
it's a religious thing, something that's related, like you should use your right hand, your right foot all the time. So when you use your left, it's like, oh, the devil will eat with you, or he will
Right.
something like that. That's what I know. I don't know about Amanda.
Amanda?
Yeah, I was basically gonna say the same thing. I mean, it seemed to be a negative thing to do anything with your left hand, especially with eating with your left hand. As Aya said, it's as eating, it's like that the devil's eating with you. That's why we recommend eating with your right hand instead. But she said it's less likely now today, but I would disagree because our parents and our generation is still forcing our younger kids to eat with their right hand or do everything else with their right hand.
So it's still prevalent, but maybe a little less prevalent than it was.
I have it less in my family because we have a lot of people left-handed. It's like a
Oh.
genetic thing. So that's why, like, when people say that, like outsiders, not from our own family, we're like, no, it's okay. They're just left-handed. They cannot eat with right hand. And they said, like, in the name of Allah before they eat, so the devil won't be anywhere near them.
Right, that's kind of protection.
Yes, yeah.
I know that in some African countries, how does it work? You shake hands only with your right hand. I think that's it, because the left hand is for anything you're doing in the bathroom. So even if you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, it's still considered unclean to use that hand to shake someone's hand. And
it's the same thing with us.
Yeah, like in other cultures, it's slowly dying out. Number 3, a teacher asked a newcomer ESL student a question in class. The student did not understand the question and thus barely looked at the teacher when responding. The teacher then retorted, "Jose, you need to pay attention in class. Why do you think the teacher said this, and why did the student behave this way?" So I'll respond to that.
I know.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I know in Pakistan, it's very rude to interrupt the teacher at all, unless you're called up.
Oh, so that's
So
interesting.
basically, you don't speak unless you're spoken to.
And that is true in many cultures, including Pakistan. That's a good response. You know, there are kids who are taught, depending on the culture, really not to look at their elders in the eye because it's disrespectful. And I don't know if
True.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned this to you before about Native American population. So we have to be careful not to misinterpret. Usma, tell me, or the rest of you, did I tell you about my good friend here in Chicago, my first friend here in Chicago, who was from Pakistan?
I don't think so. If you did, I don't remember it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you about him. Let me just quickly go to the gestures. I'm going to post this PowerPoint up. But these are gestures that we use, especially a lot as teachers, especially the perfect sign and the thumbs up and the stop. We don't really use the fig, but these things have other meanings in other cultures which are not good. Like, so we have to be very careful when we introduce these gestures to give context first. Let your class know that when you make that symbol of perfect, this is what it means. It means A-okay, it means good. So give context from the very beginning, or else there may be misunderstanding. Okay, I'm going to tell you about. No, go ahead.
The fig just made me laugh. In the school, I used to work.
I've never used the fig, but growing up in New York City, Italians use that, and I'm surprised.
When I worked in school, we had a student from India, and she was this little 10-year-old, and the teacher was like, this is how you signal to go to the washroom, and she was really embarrassed. She couldn't.
With the thumbs up or with the fig?
No, the fig.
Really?
And she couldn't ask to go to the washroom because her parents told her
never to do that.
The sign,
it's almost like the middle finger, right?
Exactly. So the little girl would have, and she confronted the teacher eventually and told her dad, and the teacher was so embarrassed. And
that's
she had
good
to
that she felt comfortable enough to go to the teacher. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So my first friend in Chicago was someone, he was studying for his PhD in pharmacy at UIC. And we just met at a bus stop and became fast friends. And he didn't know anyone here, and neither did I. And this was his first time in the United States. So he asked me to teach him some slang. And you guys, a lot of you weren't even born, but back then, this was the late 80s. everyone was saying, "What's up, homeboy?" Have you ever heard that phrase?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but I told them, you know, this is considered slang. You use it with your peers. But he forgot, and he got onto an elevator. His professor was there, and he said, "What's up, homeboy?" Another thing that happened is that he was in a science lab class, and he had a lab partner, a woman, and he asked her, he needed an eraser, and he asked for an eraser, but in Pakistan they call it something else.
They call it a rubber.
The girl slapped him in the face, and he had no idea what happened. Another thing that happened to him, you know, he was a very good student, and the professor asked a question. He raised his hand to contribute, and he contributed, and the teacher said, "Get out of here." He got up. I mean, this was early on. He got up and he left the classroom. Like, all these things were happening to him. He knows English. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's more than just grammar, vocabulary, phonology. The last thing I'll tell you.
I'm sorry.
Say that again, Usma.
I was gonna say maybe for him because we don't really have that many like sarcasm terms.
Oh yeah.
That.
That's what he told me. He said, like, he took literally, they don't really use sarcasm, he told me. So that's why everyone was laughing, not being mean, but it was kind of funny. So the last thing I'll tell you about, back when in the 80s, the hip place to go dancing was Rush Street. I don't think there's any clubs on Rush Street anymore. But he wanted to go to Rush Street. We weren't dating or anything, just friends. And I said, okay, let's go dancing on Rush Street. We took a cab, neither of us drove. And then after, when we were ready to leave, he hailed a cab. He put me in the cab, closed the door, and went all the way around. Now, as he was going around, the cab left. But that's what they do or did in Pakistan. You would never let the woman in and then get in the same door. You let the woman in, close the door, and go around to the other door. So it was a big mess because it was a one-way street. There were no cell phones back then. It was pretty funny. So all examples of pragmatics, more or less. Yeah. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so I'm looking forward to grading your annotated bibliography. But in the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. Please remember, if you haven't written it already, don't Google annotated bibliography and write a generic one that's the guidelines are online or whatever. Don't do that because my annotated bibliography is very specific, right? Summary, assessment, reflection for each entry. Okay. All right. Thank you, you guys. Good to see you again. And so I will see you next week when you have the group activity.
For the
Have
group,
a happy thanks.
for the group activity, are we supposed to be working on that ourselves with our group or just with the class next week?
Well, I gave you the information ahead of time in case you want to talk to group members about anything. It's up to you, but the work will be done in class, the writing.
Okay.
Okay, I'll put you in group breakout rooms. Okay. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
long
Thanksgiving.
weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
Happy
Okay,
Thanksgiving.
take
Bye.
care.
Would you want to talk to me on Zoom instead of email, Professor?
Sure. Let me see if
Give me a
Mandy needs to speak to me. Mandy? I don't think she's there. So if you want, I can end the recording. Let me, give me a second.
Oh,